You are out of your depth. Step aside or lose your place.
I never had a place. Open it, Mother, and tell them whose name is on that trust.
The sound was almost nothing. A crystal glass slipping from Diana Whitfield's fingers at 9:17 p.m., dropping against the hardwood floor of the Lincoln Park dining room without the crash you'd expect. Just a clean, quiet break. Nobody moved. 4.3 seconds. 11 people. Not one of them reached for the broken pieces. They weren't frozen by the glass. They were frozen by what Naomi Whitfield had just finished reading aloud. She stood at the far end of the table, both hands holding a page that had yellowed at the edges from years of careful keeping. The paper was 14 years old. The woman who'd written it had been gone for 8 months, but it was doing exactly what it had been written to do. Naomi didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at her sister. She didn't look at her sister. She looked at the page and turned to the next one. What Diana Whitfield had spent 14 years protecting ended on a December evening. Not because of a lawyer. Not because of a powerful man. Because a grandmother had loved her granddaughter enough to tell the truth from beyond the grave. Stay right here. Because what happened at that dinner table on December 24th changed everything. And I mean everything. For every person in that house. If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe before this story goes any further. We tell stories every week that stay with you, long after the last word. And you don't want to miss them. I want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Every single week, people listen from every corner of the globe, and I read every comment. This is a story about a woman, a man who stood beside her when no one else would, and a grandmother who spent 14 years making sure the truth would survive. Let's begin. Naomi Whitfield had spent 30 years learning how to take up less space, not the physical kind. She was 5'8", and she'd stopped apologizing for that at 22. But the other kind, the kind measured in how loud you laugh, how much you want, how clearly you say what you mean when someone you love is in the room, that she had always carefully managed. She learned it young. She was 9, the first time she understood that something about her was being quietly compared to something about Jade. Her aunt had reached out at a family gathering, taken Jade's face in both hands, and said, not unkindly, which was somehow the worst part, "Look at this one. Light and bright and beautiful." Nobody said anything. Her father found something interesting on the opposite wall. Her mother smiled the way she always smiled when a comment floated into the room that she didn't want to catch. And Naomi, standing 3 feet away, learned something without being taught it directly. Some things about you will be loved easily. Other things will have to justify themselves. Know the difference early. Adjust accordingly. She had no name for it at 9. Her body remembered anyway. What she did with that knowledge was this. She found architecture. At 13, she discovered that a building couldn't be compared to another building in the same casual, offhand way it could be done with daughters. A building either stood or it didn't. A room either worked or it didn't. The structural logic of a space was answerable to physics and human need, not to someone else's idea of what deserved value. She spent every afternoon drawing floor plans in the margins of her notebooks, rooms that belonged to no one yet, rooms that couldn't be taken back. By 30, she was a senior architect at Halcyon Design Group on the 31st floor of a building. She had helped redesign 3 years earlier. The position had taken 11 years, 2 student loan refinancing agreements, and more early mornings than she could accurately count. She had built it herself, entirely. That mattered. Sun-ho Kang had never been late to anything in his adult life. It wasn't politeness. People who knew him only as the CEO of Kang Capital Group, a private equity firm valued at $2.7 billion, assumed it was professional discipline. The natural habit of a man who controlled enough to have standards. It was something older than that. When Sun-ho was 14, his father had made a decision about his future in a room Sun-ho hadn't been invited into yet. By the time he walked through the door, it was already settled. He was to be the heir. He was to be trained accordingly. He was not asked whether this was what he wanted. Because in the world his father had built, that question was considered a distraction. Sun-ho had learned, over the following 19 years, to always arrive before the door closed. Being early was the only form of control he had trusted for a long time. They had met 19 months ago at an urban development conference at the Chicago Architecture Center. Naomi was presenting a community impact review. A real estate developer 3 seats to Sun-ho's left had just finished a proposal for a mixed-use South Side tower. 72 units, rooftop amenity deck, ground floor retail. Profitable, efficient. Technically within every zoning guideline. Naomi called it financially optimized and humanly irresponsible, in front of 200 people, without raising her voice. The developer's face went through several colors. The room held its breath. People glanced sideways at each other, waiting for the retreat. The softening, the professional cushion women in rooms like that were expected to produce on demand. She didn't produce it. She stood exactly as she had been standing, explained her point with 3 specific citations, sat back down. Sun-ho watched the way she didn't brace for impact after the fact. No tight jaw, no quick scan of the room to measure the damage. She had said a true thing, and that was the end of its obligation to her. He thought, this is someone who knows exactly who she is. He waited until the networking reception to introduce himself, found her near the window with a glass of water looking out at the Chicago River. Told her without preamble that her critique had been correct. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. That was the beginning. 6 months into the relationship, he asked her something no one in her 30 years had asked with any genuine interest in the answer. They were sitting in his car after a dinner that had run 2 hours longer than planned, neither of them ready to end the conversation. He turned to her and said, What do you want? Not tonight. Not this week. What do you actually want? She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window long enough that a different kind of man might have moved on. He didn't move on. He waited. Not impatiently, not as performance, just the way someone waits for something they actually intend to hear, she told him. All of it. The building in Bronzeville she'd been designing in her head for 4 years. The community center that didn't exist yet, the specific quality of light she wanted in the east-facing rooms. He listened to every word. She had been engaged to him for 6 months and 3 days when Diana Whitfield called on a Tuesday afternoon in early December and invited them both to Christmas Eve dinner at the Lincoln Park House. Just family, Diana said. Nothing formal. Naomi held the phone for a moment after the call ended. Sun-ho was watching her from across the kitchen. She's never invited me before, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. I know. Do you want to go? She thought about it honestly. She thought about the part of her that still believed families could choose in any given moment to become something better than what they had been. She thought about her father's voice last Easter, quieter than usual, saying, I miss you in the careful way of a man who doesn't know how to say harder things. Yes, she said, I want to try. They arrived at 7:23 p.m. The house was lit from inside, warm against the December dark. Through the front window, she could see the dining table already set, candles, the good china, the arrangement Diana used for occasions she considered significant. Sun-ho stopped at the threshold of the living room. 3 seconds. He took in the table, the place cards, the seating arrangement that had put Jade directly to his left, in the chair that 6 months of being Naomi's fiancé should have assigned to someone else entirely. He didn't say anything. He reached for Naomi's hand, not urgently, just steadily, and they walked in together. It wasn't until the appetizers were cleared and Diana set her fork down with a specific kind of deliberateness understood. This dinner had never been about Christmas. The dinner began the way Diana Whitfield designed all things she intended to control, beautifully. The table was impeccable. The wine had been opened at the correct temperature. Conversation moved through the early courses, the way it does when a host has carefully chosen which roads are available, familiar topics, surface pleasantries, the kind of words that fill a room without requiring anyone to say anything true. Naomi knew this table. She had grown up at it. She ate and listened, and watched her mother manage the room the way she always had. Not loudly, not obviously, but with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing it for decades and no longer needed to think about it consciously. Diana directed the conversation like water around stones. Nothing landed anywhere she hadn't intended it to land. Victor Hayes sat across from Naomi. Quiet, pleasant, asking Sun-ho careful questions about urban investment. Her Aunt Ruth was talking to Claire about something Naomi wasn't following closely. Her Uncle Leonard had refilled his wine twice. Jade sat to Sun-ho's left and said very little. That was the first thing Naomi registered. Jade was not someone who said very little. Jade filled rooms. That had always been her gift, or what had been cultivated in her as one. But tonight she was quiet in a specific way, the way a person is quiet when they already know what's coming and have been told to wait. Diana. Diana set her fork down after the main course was cleared. Clean, deliberate. The sound of it against the china was small, but it was the kind of small that pulls everyone's attention without appearing to try. I want to talk about something important, Diana said. Not a question. Not a request. An announcement. Naomi set down her wine glass. This family has always put family first. Diana's voice was measured, warm in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed warmth, and sometimes that means making difficult choices. Choices that benefit everyone, even when they're not easy in the short term. She looked at Naomi. Sun-ho is a remarkable man. Anyone can see that. A pause, just long enough. And Jade has known him longer than you realize. They have a connection that, I think, if given proper space, could become something significant, something that would be good for everyone involved. The table went still, not dramatically, just still. Naomi counted 3 seconds before anyone breathed differently. What I'm asking, Diana continued, her voice staying warm, staying measured, staying everything it had been rehearsed to stay, is for you to consider stepping back, for the family. For Jade. Naomi looked at her mother, then at Jade. Jade's hands were folded in her lap. Her expression was soft, slightly pained, the practiced look of someone who hated to be the cause of difficulty. But her eyes weren't surprised. Her eyes were waiting. Naomi had seen that expression before. She just hadn't known what to call it until now. Jade and Sun-ho are simply better suited, Diana added, as though the silence had been a request for elaboration. You have to understand. Some things are about compatibility, about the kind of presence that fits a certain world. A slight pause. Jade understands that world. There it was. Not stated loudly. Not in a way Diana would ever acknowledge if pressed, that she had said it all. Just the familiar architecture of a thought Naomi had been hearing constructed around her since she was 9 years old. Different materials each time, always the same structure underneath. Some people fit certain rooms, others make rooms uncomfortable without intending to. Adjust accordingly. She had learned the translation young. She didn't need long anymore. She looked at her mother for a moment, not with anger, not with surprise, with the specific clarity that arrives after you finally stop waiting for someone to say something different. No, Naomi said. One word. Flat. Finished. Diana's expression shifted, not dramatically, just by several degrees. The warmth recalibrated into something cooler. Naomi, I heard what you said. Naomi placed her napkin on the table. The answer is no. She moved to stand. Diana's hand closed around her wrist, not violently, not yet, just stopping. The grip of someone who had been stopping her in smaller ways her entire life and had never once had to reconsider it. Sit down. Diana's voice dropped, controlled. Don't make a scene in front of him. In front of him. In front of the family, not in front of our guests. In front of him, not. Naomi heard the distinction clearly. She had always been precise about distinctions. She did not sit down. Diana pushed. It wasn't a large movement. From across the room, it might almost have passed for a stumble. Something accidental, something that could be explained away afterward as a misread of intentions, a loss of balance, a misunderstanding between two people who'd meant well. But Naomi's shoulder hit the edge of the sideboard hard, and her engagement ring struck the glass door of the cabinet, and the sound of it was sharp enough to cut through every other sound in the room. Claire was on her feet before the sound finished. Elliot looked at the wall. Sun-ho did not move immediately. He sat perfectly still for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, Naomi understood something she had always known about him. He was not someone who reacted. He was someone who chose. Every response he produced was a decision, not a reflex. And right now, he was choosing to let the room register what it had just witnessed before he did or said anything that would give anyone permission to look somewhere else. The candles, bales on the table continued to burn. The smoke from them curled upward in thin, undisturbed lines. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for their wine. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody found a reason to look at the person beside them. 11 people sat or stood in a room and experienced collectively the specific discomfort of having seen something true about themselves reflected back at once. The kind of truth that doesn't announce itself, it just becomes visible all at once when the right thing breaks the silence it was hiding behind. Diana stood with her hand still slightly extended. Naomi straightened. She smoothed the sleeve of her jacket slowly, methodically. The way you do something when you need your hands to have a deliberate task. She walked back to her chair, sat down, reached for her bag. Her fingers found the envelope before she consciously looked for it, like it had been waiting. She held it in her lap and didn't open it yet, just held it. If they ever take your future from you again, her grandmother had said, 11 days before she died, her voice steady in a way that had nothing to do with her health and everything to do with a decision she had made long ago, open this in front of everyone. Naomi looked up. 12 people in this room, 12 witnesses. She placed the envelope on the table in front of her. What no one in that room knew was that the envelope Naomi's fingers had just found wasn't simply a letter. It was the end of a story Diana Whitfield had been telling for 14 years. And the first page of the true one. The room had found a stillness that was different from the one before. Before, when Diana had pushed her, the stillness had been shock. The involuntary pause that arrives when a line is crossed publicly and no one has yet decided what to do about it. This was something else. This was 12 people deciding, without speaking, without coordinating, that they were going to stay, that whatever was in the envelope on the table, they were going to hear it. Nobody left. Nobody found a reason to check their phone. Nobody excused themselves for the bathroom or the kitchen or any of the small exits people construct when a room becomes something they'd rather not be inside. Naomi peeled the envelope open slowly, not because her hands were shaking, they weren't, but because the paper was old and she had learned in the 8 months since Opal died to handle the things her grandmother had carefully preserved with the same care that had gone into preserving them. The last time Naomi had seen her grandmother truly still was at a school gymnasium in November 16 years ago. She had been 16. The end of semester project for her design foundations class had been a scaled model. A small residential neighborhood, 8 buildings, green space threaded between them. She had spent 6 weeks on it. Every afternoon after school, at the desk in her room, measuring and cutting and starting over. She had told no one how much she wanted it to be good. Opal came to the exhibition alone. She stood in front of Naomi's model for a long time, long enough that Naomi started to worry. That something was wrong, that the work wasn't what she'd thought it was, that her grandmother was searching for the right way to say something gentle and disappointing. Then Opal said, without looking at her, I don't understand architecture, but I know when something has been made with love. And that was all. No elaboration, no follow-up. They stood together for 5 more minutes, looking at the model, and for the first time in her life, Naomi felt something she hadn't known she was waiting for. The sense that what she had made didn't need to justify its existence to anyone. She already knew who I was, Naomi thought now, sliding the first page free. Before I did. The letter began in Opal's handwriting, precise, deliberate, the penmanship of a woman who believed that how you wrote something was a form of respect for what you were saying. Naomi, if you are reading this in front of the family, know this. I did not collect these documents because I wanted anyone to suffer. I collected them because the truth deserved a witness. And you deserved protection. Naomi read it aloud. Her voice was even. The way you read something when you need the words to carry themselves. She turned to the first attached document. A trust fund, established by Opal Whitfield in March 2013, named beneficiary Naomi Whitfield. Initial value, $187,400. Account number, account institution name, date of establishment. Each annotated in Opal's careful handwriting beside a photocopied statement. The second document was a transfer record, November 2016. Named beneficiary amended to Jade Whitfield. The third document was a signature verification report from an independent notary, prepared 14 months before Opal died. The signature on the 2016 transfer was not Opal Whitfield's. Beside this document, underlined twice, Opal had written, "I did not sign this. I never authorized this transfer. I want that on record." The room absorbed it the way a body absorbs cold water. Not immediately, but in the seconds after contact, when the temperature finally registers fully. Diana said nothing. Jade looked at her hands. Elliot's jaw moved, as though he had started a sentence, and then, as he had done for most of his life, decided not to finish it. Naomi waited the appropriate length of time. Then she turned to the second page. She found the line halfway down. It was written alongside a photocopied letter on Parsons School of Design letterhead, dated March 2014, portfolio submitted to Parsons School of Design, spring 2014, under the name Jade Whitfield. Original authorship, Naomi Whitfield. Naomi read it once to herself. Then she placed the page down flat on the table. She didn't look up. She looked at the letterhead, at the date, March 2014. And her mind did the arithmetic that hands do without permission when the numbers are ones you've been carrying for years without knowing what they added up to. She had been 22. The portfolio had taken 14 months. Every project in it had been built from something real. The neighborhood she grew up in, the library on the corner she had drawn and redrawn from memory, the community center that had never been built and she had always believed should have been. She had called it hers for the first time in her life, with the full weight of that word. Someone had taken her name off it, sent it out into the world wearing someone else's, waited for the acceptance letter it earned. Enrolled in September, Naomi thought about a kitchen table. Spring, the window open. Her mother sitting across from her, her voice carefully softened into something that sounded like sorrow. "Parsons didn't accept you. I know that's hard. There are other programs. Good ones. Closer to home." She had believed it. She had believed it because she was 22 and because she had no reason. No older sister to warn her, no grandmother, who had yet told her what to look for. No reason to consider that the rejection itself might not have existed. That, somewhere in the distance, a committee had read her work, read her name, and written back, and the letter had simply never been allowed to reach her. Jade enrolled at Parsons that fall. Naomi had thought it was coincidence. She had rebuilt anyway, had fought her way into rooms that the right education would have opened more gracefully, had worked harder and earlier and longer, and she had done it, all of it. But that was not the point, and she knew it was not the point. The point was 14 months of work given another person's name. The point was being 22, at a kitchen table, in the spring, believing your mother. 16 years. Diana's crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It landed on the hardwood floor the same way it had at the start of the evening. No dramatic crash, no explosion of sound. Just a clean, quiet break, the same note, a different meaning. Nobody reached for the pieces. The candles had not gone out. The table had not moved, physically. The room was exactly as it had been 30 seconds ago. But the woman who had spent 30 years learning to take up less space had just run out of reasons to keep doing it. And every person in that room felt the shift before she said another word. The door from the hallway opened at 9:34 p.m. Victor Hayes entered without knocking. Because he had been waiting in the front sitting room for 47 minutes, and the only person in the house who knew he was there had just finished reading the last page aloud. He was 61, gray, at the temples, darks, suit, briefcase worn at the corners in the way of something that had been carried through many difficult rooms and was not troubled by one more. He crossed to the table, set the briefcase flat, opened it without rushing, and looked around at the 11 faces watching him. I'm Victor Hayes. Opal Whitfield was my client for 22 years. She asked me to be here tonight. He sat. He opened the first folder. He moved through the information the way Opal had always moved through difficult things. Without urgency, without performance, as though the truth had its own weight, and that weight deserved careful handling. Trust fund principal, $187,400, established March 2013. Recalculated at standard investment growth rates over 10 years, 341,880. Applicable categories under Illinois state law: forgery, financial misappropriation, transfer of assets under fraudulent authorization. These are not accusations, Victor said, closing the second folder. These are classifications. What they become, a civil proceeding, a private settlement, or nothing at all, depends on decisions made tonight and in the coming weeks. Opal's intention was not punishment. Her intention was that Naomi have the protection of knowing what she is legally owed, and documentation sufficient to act on it. He placed both hands flat on the table. Nobody spoke. Then Diana spoke. She turned towards Sun-ho. The movement was subtle, posture adjusting, voice recalibrating, but Naomi had watched that particular shift her entire life. It was Diana's instinctive reorientation toward the most powerful person in a room. Automatic. Lifelong. She had done it without thinking at every family dinner, every difficult conversation, every moment when the room needed to be managed back into something she could control. You're a reasonable man, Diana said. You understand complicated families, history. I'm asking you, as someone who cares about Naomi, to help us resolve this privately. The way family matters should be resolved. Sun-ho looked at her. He was quiet long enough that the silence had texture. Then he stood. I've known about Victor Hayes for 3 months, he said. Opal's attorney contacted me after she passed. I was asked to review the documentation. He looked at Diana without heat, without performance. I said yes, and then I waited. A pause. I wanted to see if you would choose on your own to tell the truth. Call Naomi. Write something. Arrange to give back what was taken. Anything. His voice stayed level. You didn't. He looked at her a moment longer and then said something not for the room, but directly to her. I grew up in a family that made decisions about my future in rooms I hadn't been invited into yet. By the time I walked through the door, it was already settled. They called it love. A brief pause. I know exactly what that looks like on the person it happens to. I recognized it the first time I saw Naomi in a room with you. He sat back down. The room received this without sound. Diana's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Something moved through her expression, fast, then carefully controlled. She stepped away from the table and answered. Naomi watched without being able to hear. What she observed was the specific set of her mother's jaw going rigid once, then releasing. The color in Diana's face withdrawing the way light withdraws before a storm. The sustained effort of a woman maintaining composure when composure is the only thing she has left. Diana ended the call. Set the phone face down on the sideboard without looking at it again. She did not explain what the call had contained. She didn't need to. 11 people had watched her face do the explaining. At the far end of the table, a man named Gerald Sutton quietly set his napkin down. Gerald was 64. Third-generation Chicago real estate money. He and Diana had served on the same Arts Foundation board for 11 years. She had placed him at this table as someone whose presence would signal something. Consequence, legitimacy. The gravity of a serious world taking serious note of Sun-ho Kang. He stood, looked at Sun-ho. A brief, precise incline of the head, not a greeting, not warmth, an acknowledgement of something he was not going to name in present company. Diana, he said. I'll see myself out. He collected his coat and left without looking at anyone else. Nobody asked why. Those who understood, understood. Those who didn't, understood enough. Jade spoke next, not loudly, not with the staged grief that the moment might have accommodated. Just quietly, in the voice of someone who has been carrying a sentence for a long time and is finally too tired to go on carrying it. Mom always told me I was more sensitive, she said, that I needed more care, that Naomi was strong, that Naomi could handle things. She said it so many times I stopped questioning it. I accepted all of it. A pause. I told myself it wasn't taking anything from anyone, that it was just the way things were. She didn't look at Naomi. I know that's not an explanation. I just needed to say it once as a true thing. Nobody answered. Naomi looked at her sister, 26 years old, given everything, and somehow still arrived here, in this condition, in this room, and felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not forgiveness, not warmth. Something closer to exhaustion, and beneath the exhaustion, a kind of understanding. Diana had not only withheld from Naomi, she had built Jade into someone who could not stand without support and called that construction love. 2 daughters, 2 different kinds of damage. Elliot stood last. He did not look at Diana. He did not look at Jade or at the table or at the middle distance where people look when they are about to say something they are not quite ready to complete. He looked at Naomi. "You don't have to forgive me tonight," he said. His voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard from him before. "I'm not asking for that. I just need you to know, I saw things. For years. Things that didn't sit right, and every time I convinced myself that staying quiet was keeping the peace." He stopped. "I told myself I was protecting the family. A breath. I was protecting myself, and I failed you because of it. I'm sorry, Naomi." The room held it. Sun-ho placed one hand on Naomi's shoulder. One hand. Nothing more. He did not look at the room, he was looking at her, and the gesture said what needed to be said, that he was here, that he was not moving, that whatever the room decided to do next, that particular question was already answered. 4 months later, the name Diana Whitfield would appear in Cook County court records, ballot. But that night, in a dining room in Lincoln Park, what mattered was something quieter and more permanent than any legal document. The truth had been spoken aloud in front of witnesses, and the woman who had carried it for 30 years had finally set it down. 7 months later, Jade settled the civil case in April, 11 weeks after Victor Hayes filed the initial documentation with Cook County courts. The agreement was reached outside of trial. Full restitution of $341,880, payable over 36 months, plus a formal written apology to be delivered before a gathering of the immediate family. No criminal charges were pursued, contingent on full payment adherence and the formal acknowledgement being made without condition. Jade signed the agreement on a Tuesday morning. Her attorney was present. Victor Hayes was present. A notary was present. Naomi was at work. She had chosen not to attend. She didn't need to watch it happen. She only needed it to happen. Diana resigned from the board of the Whitfield Arts Foundation in March. 7 of 9 members had submitted a collective letter requesting her departure before the February meeting closed. The philanthropy world in Chicago was, as it had always been, a series of connected rooms. Nobody announced anything. Nobody said anything publicly. The invitation lists for certain dinners quietly changed. The phone calls Diana had always been able to count on began arriving less frequently. Then, not at all. In May, a letter arrived at Naomi's office from Parsons School of Design. The admissions committee confirmed the finding. The portfolio submitted under the name Jade Whitfield in spring 2014 had been authored by Naomi Whitfield. The school could not alter the historical record. What it could do was formally acknowledge the authorship and extend an invitation to participate in that autumn's alumni design exhibition as a featured contributor. The letter included a handwritten note from the current dean. 2 sentences. "Your work was exceptional. It should have carried your name." Naomi read those 2 sentences 4 times. Then she folded the letter back into its envelope and set it face down on her desk. She did not read it again for 3 days. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered in the specific way that things arriving 16 years late always matter. With a weight that requires a patient, particular kind of container. Elliot did not ask for forgiveness. He showed up. In February, he drove Naomi and Sun-ho to 3 wedding venues, round trips, 4 hours, total, without being asked twice and without offering opinions unless directly prompted. In March, he appeared at their apartment on a Saturday morning with a set of tools and a question about a cabinet door that had been sticking. He stayed 6 hours, fixed several other things Naomi hadn't mentioned, ate dinner with them, and left without the conversation becoming anything heavier than it needed to be. In April, he called on a Thursday evening to ask how the Bronzeville project was coming along. Good, Naomi said. Slow, the way good things are. A pause. That's right, he said. They talked for 22 minutes. After she hung up, Sun-ho looked at her from across the kitchen. He's learning, she said. Sun-ho nodded. People can. Trust didn't return in a single gesture. It came back the way it had always grown in the relationships that lasted, in small, unremarkable increments, accumulating over time without insisting on acknowledgement. Diana came to the office on a Tuesday afternoon in May. No appointment, no warning. She sat down across from Naomi's desk the way she had always occupied every room, as though her presence had been arranged in advance by virtue of what she was. She was dressed as she always dressed, carefully, precisely, in the manner of a woman who had always believed that presentation was a form of argument. She spoke for several minutes. She used words like protect and circumstances and the world I came up in. She talked about the decisions she had made with the information she possessed at the time, about the particular difficulties of the era she had navigated, about what she had believed she was preparing Naomi for. She did not say, I was wrong. Sad. She said, you have to understand why. Naomi listened without interrupting. Let the full weight of it arrive without deflecting, without arguing, without reaching for any of the responses she had turned over in quiet moments for months. Then she stood, crossed to the office door, opened it. Mom? Her voice was even. Not cold, not warm. Something cleaner than either. You did all of those things and called it love. I understand now why you needed to believe that. A pause. But I don't need you to understand me to know who I am, and I don't need your agreement to move forward. She held the door open. Diana sat for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she rose, picked up her bag, and walked to the door without looking directly at Naomi. She paused at the threshold. Half a second, the length of something she either considered saying or decided against, and then she was gone. Naomi held the door for 3 seconds after her mother's footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she closed it, not hard, not with emphasis. Just closed it the way you close something when its purpose has been fully served. She stood with her back to the room for 30 seconds. Felt her breathing return to its usual pace. This was not forgiveness. It was not the end either. It was something more precise than both. The moment she stopped waiting for a particular door to open and understood, quietly and without ceremony, that she had already walked through a different one. 7 months after Christmas Eve, Naomi arrived at the office at 6:43 in the morning. The city was doing what July does to Chicago, filling the eastern sky with flat, unhurried light that crossed the lake and landed on the glass towers without apology. From the 17th floor, she could see 3 bridges. The streets below were still quiet, the geometry of the city running clean through the morning, the way lines run through a drawing before it becomes a building. On her desk was the Bronzeville Project, a community center, 3 blocks from the street where her grandmother had grown up. And not her highest profile commission, not the one the architecture journals would photograph, not the one that would appear on the firm's year-end announcement, just the one she had started 3 weeks after Christmas Eve and had not been able to stop working on, for reasons she understood completely and didn't need to explain to anyone. The drawings were still early, structural lines only. Walls without windows, rooms without ceilings yet, the bones of something waiting to become what it was meant to be. Sun-ho arrived at 6:58. He set a coffee beside the drawings without asking where she wanted it. He looked at the page on top of the pile. The east-facing rooms, Naomi said. I want the main hall to face east. Best light. He sat down in the chair beside her desk. Not at a desk of his own, not across from her, beside her. He opened his coffee and said nothing further. She thought about a school gymnasium in November. Her grandmother standing in front of a scale model of 8 small buildings and the green space threaded between them, quietly, for a long time. long enough that Naomi had begun to worry. I don't understand architecture, but I know when something has been made with love, and this was. She picked up her pen, found the line she had been working on the night before. The entrance threshold, the precise moment a building first receives a person, that boundary between outside and inside, where the architecture makes its first promise, and continued. Her hand was steady. That was all it needed to be. Not a triumph, not a ceremony, just a woman at a desk in the early morning with a drawing in front of her and the particular quality of July light coming through the east-facing glass, and the knowledge finally settled somewhere below conscious thought that this was hers. All of it. The work, the morning, the hand that held the pen. No one had given it to her. No one could take it. If you've stayed with this story until now, I want to hear from you, not about Naomi winning. Not about Diana or Jade or the legal settlement. I want to know this. Have you ever been in a room where someone you loved asked you to make yourself smaller so they could feel bigger? Have you ever spent years believing a story about yourself that someone else wrote and one day discovered it wasn't true? That's what this story is really about. Not the trust fund, not the portfolio, not the powerful man in the room. It's about a woman who learned, slowly, painfully, with help from a grandmother who loved her enough to plan 14 years ahead, that the truth about who you are doesn't require anyone else's signature to be valid. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Tell me what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me what you would have done in Naomi's place. And if someone in your life has ever been that person, the one who saw you clearly when no one else did, who quietly prepared for a day you didn't know was coming, share this story for them. Like this video if Naomi's story meant something to you. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Every week, stories like this one's about ordinary people, extraordinary courage, and the kind of truth that survives everything thrown at it. Thank you for being here.